Thanks for tuning into another Dolphins podcast. I cannot believe it, but we are already preparing for Week 14, and the Dolphins are back at home to host the Jets at Hard Rock Stadium this Sunday. Kat and Houtz are both joining me to preview this AFC East bout. Kat, I have a way for us just to set the tone here. How should we feel about the 33rd team, the football think tank that provides NFL content to fans through former NFL players, coaches, and executives? The group that's helping hire the next Jets head coach, how do you feel about them having Tua Tagovailoa ranked as a top 5 quarterback in the NFL?
It's interesting. I actually am a little bit behind. Hadn't heard that. But look, I'm interested to see how the season ends with Tua. I mean, statistically, you're talking about somebody who's completing almost 75% of his passes. 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, if my stats are correct. No, 15 and 4. And I really wish against the Packers that the Dolphins weren't down 14-0 when Tua was 2 for 2 for 18 yards at that time. So, as the years go by, you see him. It's almost like even though the Dolphins haven't gotten to where they want with Tua, it seems like every year he's proving people wrong in a different way, but not in terms of the overall picture. Like this year, I think he just seems a lot more agile, a lot more aware, a lot more able to create, and marrying his feet with his eyes even better. So I'm excited to see what's next for Tua here.
I feel like we keep getting teased, and I mean, I think we all kind of feel the world of Tua Tagovailoa, but to hear them say he's ranked top 5, I don't trust him with that. So we saw him lead the league in passing. We're seeing him this year completion percentage. I just want to see us win a playoff game eventually. So top 5 is a little bit too much for my liking, but he's definitely in consideration for top 10 because when he's healthy, I mean, like you said, he's absolutely cooking.
And to be clear, I don't think he's top 5 either. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes are still light years above him and the rest. And I don't think Tua's 5th. Top 10? Yeah, I think you can make that argument if he stays healthy.
The Dolphins scored 34 points in back-to-back games before falling 30-17 to the Green Bay Packers on Thanksgiving night. It was cold. It was prime time. Kat, we haven't seen him for a couple weeks, so how do you feel about where the Dolphins stand right now? They were in striking distance of reaching 500 last week. Obviously, they dig the hole a little deeper. They sit at 5-7, 5 weeks left in the year.
Yeah, look, there is no shame in going into Lambeau on Thanksgiving and against the Packers, who were going to the playoffs, are probably going to win 11, 12 games and lose and dropping that game. I get it. The cold weather stuff, yeah, it's a thing, but I don't read into it as much. Here's my problem. Since September 25th, 2022, when the Dolphins won that game against the Bills to go to 3-0, if you remember that game, the Josh Allen game where he couldn't get the snap off. The rest of the 2022 season, the Dolphins faced 5 playoff teams. They went 0-5. The following year, 2023, the Dolphins faced 7 playoff teams. They went 1-6. This year, they have faced 5 teams that, if the season ended today, would be in the playoffs. 0-5 in those games. If you haven't vomited yet, they're 1-16 against playoff teams in the last 3 years. So the question needs to be asked, if on that day, September 25th, 2022, if I had asked you, do you think the head coach should stick around if this Dolphins roster wins 1 game against a playoff team in the next 26 and a half months? I think everyone would have had the same answer. That's where my head is at right now. Yes, and Chris Greer can go too.
I don't know how to follow that up. I mean, he's preaching. We all kind of feel that way at this point. I don't think anybody could have said it any better than that, so I can't follow it up, Kat.
Doesn't it kind of feel, though, it's like the same thing with Tua? Like, he's doing things differently and he's doing things well, but there's still just it's not translating to wins. I don't think it's as bad as it was with Ryan Tannehill, where I was pulling out my hair in 2015. Like, how dare Andy Dalton make a Pro Bowl over Ryan Tannehill and his, 20 touchdowns and 12 interceptions? But, I mean, I continue to see McDaniel change and the offense evolve. I continue to see him acknowledge some weaknesses, especially on the defensive side, and try new things where God, man, because I completely agree with you. If you take that stat, nothing else, and what was it, 1-16, Kat? If you just go with that, it is an absolute disaster. But there's Like,
I see what you're saying, because look, with Adam Gase and Ryan Tannehill, you knew that they were not going to win more than 9 games. They didn't have the talent to win more than 9 games. It was just not going to happen. The frustrating thing is, I feel like, yeah, there are holes on this roster, no doubt about that. There are injuries, but you feel like the talent is there. I mean,
Yep.
but they've lost that 1-16 record against playoff teams. They've lost every which way. They've lost in games where Tua was on fire. They've lost in games where the defense was on fire, like in the last game of the season against Buffalo, and the special teams and the offense doesn't work. Like, they play the most uncomplimentary football I have ever seen any NFL team play. You could pull up so many examples. The Eagles game last year. Tyreek Hill is, the number one player on NFL.com. And what, he drops 2 touchdowns in that game, which end up being the difference in the game. Raheem Mostert never fumbles the ball, and you can make the case that he blew 2 games with fumbles this year. So I could go on and on, but they have a chance, though, because in the final 5 games, you got the Jets twice, you got the Browns, you have a 49ers team at home and what now looks like a very winnable game, and at Houston, which is by far the hardest game, but they seem very beatable too. So they've got to do a clean sweep here. It's not impossible. Do I think it'll happen? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's going to happen. It's just frustrating when on paper it seems like this team could be so much better, like you mentioned. I mean, they're absolutely underachieving in a way, and for as much as Chris Green needs to go, I mean, I think to an extent Mike McDaniel also has to go, but we're seeing with the Dan Campbell, right? We're going to see with Brian Flores soon enough. Like, these guys, they come here, they get all their crap out, and then they go on to have success elsewhere, and I don't think anybody wants to see McDaniel being that next, what if for the Dolphins, although, on this current path, it kind of seems inevitable.
And also to cut in there too, with the Dolphins salary cap situation for next year, that is one thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Where let's say the Dolphins go 8-9 or 9-8, which is kind of where I think they're going to be at the end of the year here. Is there a point to fire Mike McDaniel, bring in another coach for a year with this really McDaniel specific offensive personnel, and bring in a Mike Vrabel for a year, and him have to sort through all this and probably be a lame duck 1-year coach? So that's where I go back and forth with McDaniel too.
The one thing about the Lions, and don't hear what I'm not saying, because Dan Campbell is absolutely awesome, I just want to see what happens when Ben Johnson leaves. Like, are we just going to ignore the fact that Ben Johnson is jockeying to become like the highest paid first year head coach of all time? And like, that is such a big aspect of what the Lions are doing. Like, don't get me wrong, Dan Campbell has been absolutely awesome, but I just think it's so weird that we're like, we had our guy, but like, you saw him when he was the interim coach in Miami. He was not this guy. And you could argue that, the offense, we still need to see that happen. So it just kind of confuses me when people come out and are so confident. Kat, you mentioned that winning 5 straight is a possibility, but the fact that the Dolphins sit at 5-7 for these reasons, Raheem Mostert fumbling away 2 games, Tyreek Hill having those struggles in the past, not being out there at the goal line against the Packers, those reasons, these inconsistencies really speak why I don't think they're going to win 5 straight. Like, I hate to be doom and gloom 9 minutes into the podcast, but like, these inconsistencies that have them at 5-7, you look at the Cardinals game as one example. You're like, God, if you really wanted to puff your stats, like that Cowboys game last year where you're able to eke out a win with 17,000 field goals. Shout out Jason Sanders, who just won AFC Special Teams Player of the Month. But that game where you lose 28-27, there's no reason Miami should have lost that game. That's the perfect example of like playoff in the hunt type team. They're going to be on the verge and they can just boost that stat. So that's one where I look at, and when you see these inconsistencies happening, you do look at coaching right away. But I do like your point about the keeping the contracts, keeping everything in place just because of how things are structured.
I think it doesn't bother the Dolphins to lose as much as it bothers other teams. That's to me what it comes down to and what the psyche of the team is. Everyone wants to win. But are you that bothered when you lose? Based on how I've seen some of these players on the sideline in the fourth quarter, I don't think so. I mean, and it speaks to that this is one of the oldest rosters in the league because it is. They've been in the league for a while. They've been successful. They've been paid. I think that contributes to it as well. So it's interesting you brought up the Lions, and yeah, Ben Johnson will be a head coach, well deserved, highly paid in the NFL next year, but they've established a culture with teeth there. I mean, they've got the best offensive line in the league. Damn it, I wish we would have drafted Penny Sewell over Jaylen Waddle now. And they have this next man up mentality. I mean, how many times have you seen the Lions play and you see like Dan Skipper out there at right guard, players like that, and they don't miss a beat. And when Ben Johnson leaves, I expect him to not miss a beat either.
And Ben Johnson, I got to throw Aaron Glenn out there too, right, on defense. I mean, I think I saw he was without like 17. So it was a crazy amount of starters they were still overcoming and, making that, being able to win games. And I think, like you said, it goes back to, I saw someone post a Dan Campbell quote from when he took over for the Dolphins. It was like, we're going to build on the defensive line. We're going to build on the offensive line. And here we are, how many years later? And we still do not have the trenches figured out.
One injury and the entire unit implodes. Guys, this is something I kind of overlooked. Was Mike McDaniel really shivering on the sidelines on Thanksgiving? This is something I think you brought up before. Can this man just wear a coat? Can he, I think that's also like a huge part of the shtick too. They're caring too much about not caring about the cold, right? I think McDaniel was actually shaking. You saw Tyreek Hill, sad clapping his hands when the Dolphins were down a bunch. Dude, just put on a jacket. Matt LaFleur on the other sideline was wearing, it's so silly. It's so stupid to see that kind of stuff.
It's hard to ignore 23 missed tackles and defenders outwardly talking about that they were code after the game. It's 25 degrees. Like the Chiefs game last year, look, yes, you got to play the conditions. When it's -6 and it's historically cold and you have a -30 wind chill and you have people that went to the game who tragically had to have body parts amputated because it was so cold out. That's a different thing. I was mad they lost the game, but I got 25 degrees. I took my daughter out in the stroller for a walk in 25-degree weather. I mean, professional athletes, are you kidding me?
For 3 hours?
I wanted to throw up after hearing Jordan Brooks talk.
And I love Javon Holland, but he's talking about the shoe not fitting and things like that. And I mean, we've talked about on the pod, he's making business decisions this season. I mean, it's absolutely frustrating. And to see your coach, again, like you said, just absolutely shivering on the sideline. I mean, just put a damn jacket on, man. No one thinks you're tough.
I've had enough of him too. Look, I think he's a good player, but no, he's not having the season he should be having. And $15 to $20 million. I mean, if that's the going rate, no, thank you. He can go, and I'll take the compensatory pick.
Considering we have this awful taste about this Miami Dolphins defense in our mouths, let's just kind of talk it out here. Let's see, is this a get right game for this unit? Breece Hall, he's doubtful. Garrett Wilson, his availability is up in the air. Aaron Rodgers, this is going to be the first time the Dolphins face him in a Jets uniform. And on top of that, he's been sacked at least 2 times in each of the last 4 games. Cap, can they tee off against Rodgers?
Yeah, I think it's defensively they'll be a lot better this week. I mean, they've got to be. But just very specifically a few matchups. I mean, getting Kendall Fuller back is big because I love him opposite Ramsey, and then you can move Cater Kohu in the slot. You really improve 2 positions, which is going to be big. Tyron Smith is out for the year for the Jets. He wasn't having a great year anyway. Ola Fashanu, the first rounder, will be playing left tackle. At right tackle, I'm really interested to see what happens with Chop Robinson against Morgan Moses because we saw him have 3 or 4 great games, Chop Robinson. We saw the talent. In fairness, he was going up probably against the 3 worst right tackles in the league. Now, against the Packers, he was silent. Then again, Zach Tom is turning into one of the better right tackles in the league. He should be a Dolphin, but he's not because they didn't draft him. But this week now he goes up against Morgan Moses, who's a very heavy-footed, wily veteran. But that's going to be an interesting matchup with him and against Titus Howard the next 2 weeks because you're not facing a great right tackle. You're not facing a terrible right tackle. You're facing good right tackles now, and that's where Chop Robinson needs to live. He is much better rushing against right tackles than left tackles. Every statistic and metric has shown this, going back to his Penn State days. So I don't think he'll face his old college teammate Ola Fashanu in this one.
I know a lot of people are hyped about that. I almost went and retweeted. I think it was like the Senior Bowl or something like that. There was like a rep that they had one-on-one. I was getting ready to retweet that. For me, it's Anthony Walker's back in this one, right? Or should be back. I mean, that's going to be that difference maker, I believe, for that defense up front. And obviously not even Breece Hall. I looked it up. I mean, Breece Hall is an absolute stud. Not having him in that lineup definitely changes that offense. But for me, I just go back to, you hear Mike McDaniel talk about how great Aaron Rodgers is. We know how great Aaron Rodgers was at one point. I mean, it just feels like for as much as we can easily sit here and say, the Dolphins should run away with this one, part of me just thinks, the So Dolphins way would be to see Aaron Rodgers go out there and just carve our ass up for old time's sake.
Yeah, Braylon Allen's going to be taking over here for Breece Hall at the time of this podcast.
He runs pretty hard, doesn't he? He's a pretty hard runner.
He's averaging 3.6 yards a carry this year. So but he's talented. I mean, you're talking 6'2", 240. And when Aaron Rodgers completed a pass to him early in the year, it was the biggest gap in age of a quarterback completed a pass to a running back. Braylon Allen, even though he played 4 years at Wisconsin, he was barely 20 when he was drafted. It's a weird Amobi Okoye type of situation with him. But he's talented, and he's going to get his chance to be the bell cow. Fascinated to see that. Also fascinated just to see what happens with Aaron Rodgers, because he's not even the guy that we saw 2 years ago when Dolphins played the Packers on Christmas. It seemed like 2 years ago, Rodgers would stay in there, stay in the pocket to the last minute, and then release it. It seems like it's 180 degrees the opposite direction now, where he is really getting rid of the ball fast. So that intensifies the need for the Dolphins to get in the backfield.
Kendall Fuller, I believe he was expected or projected to be or clear the concussion protocol on Friday, so it'd be nice for the Dolphins to have him back. How do we feel about this matchup with the Jets receivers versus the Miami Dolphins secondary? Garrett Wilson, 5 touchdowns. He leads the team in receiving yards. Devontae Adams, old friend of Aaron Rodgers, and for my fantasy team, I hope he finishes out the year strong. But someone I think is going to cause the Dolphins problems, and Josh, you mentioned something being so Dolphins. Allen Lazard is back. He also has 5 touchdowns. He's been with Aaron Rodgers forever. If you want to see Dolphin fans lose their mind, it's because Allen Lazard in the slot with Kader Kohou, who's questionable because of his back injury. It's Lazard just eating all day long while Wilson and Adams are just kind of standing there. That would be my So Dolphins disaster scenario of the week.
Not something that causes me massive concern, but that would be that. That would be terrible. And mine is Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, and Tyrod Taylor comes in.
Yep.
And now it's back to the 2017, 2018 Adam Gase Buffalo Bills days. We did get the better of Tyrod Taylor in 2021. I think Dolphins were 1-7, and I think they won 17-9, and probably a game that you should have to be sentenced to watch. But yeah, that would be my That's So Dolphins moment, is if Tyrod Taylor somehow entered the game and take it from there.
Perfect time to get Fuller back, though, with Adams and Garrett Wilson. I mean, those guys, I know we're Dolphin fans and we like to crap all over the Jets, but just like Breece Hall, I mean, those are 2 studs that they're going to have for a long, long time. I don't know if you guys feel this way. Are you guys worried at all about Tyler Conklin? We've seen us get absolutely gashed by tight ends. Not one of those, big names that we might have been gashed by Brock Bowers and things like that prior, but Tyler Conklin, I mean, could he not be that guy that just feeds in the middle, eats it up in the middle of that Dolphins defense?
He's a solid player, I think, but he's good. If I could see, we've had some games. I'm trying to think of some examples where the tight end has just feasted, not because of talent, but because he was just left wide open.
Him feasting would be like and this is still bad. It'd be like a 6 for 60 with 2 touchdowns. It wouldn't be these big explosive plays. It'd just be the fact he's just left open time after time. And Kev, one thing here to wrap up the talk here on the defense, the middle of the field is just so concerning for the Dolphins. Obviously, you have one linebacker going through the spin zone with Anthony Walker's injury with David Long Jr. But then the safeties too, Javon Holland having a straight out down year, Jordan Poyer, enough said there. Are you concerned about the middle of the Dolphins defense and that this tackling issue that we saw against the Packers could just continue to build on top of itself?
The tackling issue, I really do believe it was kind of a one-game thing. I mean, it was kind of an outlier. Heading into the game, the Dolphins were one of the best tackling teams in the league. And that's what frustrates me, that you have a massive game that you absolutely have to have, and you not only missed 23 tackles, but you also say you were cold at the end. Like, I mean, but anyway, to me, overall, I really like Anthony Weaver. I really like his defense. I think he's a head coach in waiting, all that. One thing with his defense is both two inside linebackers play a lot of snaps. And when you do that, and two of the guys in the middle of that defense are Jordan Poyer and Anthony Walker. Walker's, done a commendable job, but not a lot of speed there. And I'm interested to see, with all the holes the Dolphins have, is a Malachi Starks from Georgia in the middle of the first round. Is he somebody that could come into this defense and just add a different layer of speed? Or like a Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma, somebody like that who's got a lot of length. We've got time to talk about. We're not quite at draft talk yet, but we might be one game away from it.
Yeah, we're one game away for sure. And Malachi Starks, that was like the first guy on my list that I was actually going to watch. And what happened last time we drafted a Georgia Bulldog? Wasn't that Rashad Jones? I mean, he turned out pretty damn good. So,
round steal.
Dolphins absolutely need a safety. I don't know what you guys thought, but I saw Marcus May get an interception for another team, and I'm just like, that's so Dolphins, isn't it? So, I'm definitely concerned about this. I mean, long term, it's absolutely a concern. Short term, Javon Holland's not playing very well. Jordan Poyer, you mentioned Anthony Walker being a liability in coverage. So, yeah, that's absolutely a concern for me. But, again, not so much against the Jets. I feel like we all kind of agree that they should go out there and just put an ass beating down for good time's sake.
Dolphins and Jets played twice last year, a 34-13 win for Miami and then a 30-0 win for the Dolphins as well. Kat, I think if Miami really wants to get the gross taste out of our mouths from last week, it starts with running the football, and it needs to be better than what we saw last week in Green Bay. Raheem Mostert, 5 carries for 19 yards, a long of 12. Devon Achane, this blew my mind, 7 carries for 13 yards with a long of 13. 7 carries for 14 yards with a long of 13. That's 6 carries for a whopping 1 yard. Is this rushing attack that had success against the Raiders, had success against the Patriots, all of a sudden a little broken, a little figured out here? Or was that also like you feeling maybe a one-game blip?
Yeah, I think a lot had to do with two things against the Packers. Is you get down 14-0 early, and there were so many plays too where, and this is a problem with, this is my only problem with Achane, is that you find yourself in a lot of 2nd and 11, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9 situations here. And shame on Mike McDaniel for completely taking the power aspect of the running game out of the equation, off the table. And look, I was frustrated after Mostert fumbled. I mean, I even had a few choice words for Mostert, said they should cut him, etc. Look, I think he should be out of the doghouse, and we should get those trains back on the track. But I also thought, too, if they were going to, let's say discipline Mostert, take some carries away, I thought Jeff Wilson would be the guy that steps in there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense to me. The one playoff team the Dolphins beat last year, Dallas, or in the last 3 years, the Cowboys, we saw Jeff Wilson in the fourth quarter close that game out.
Good point.
And then the fourth quarter of the Jaguars game, we saw Jeff Wilson be a big part of that. I don't understand what this guy did, I know, Jake, you don't want to see him catch passes, but for crying out loud, can you...
Why has he been on the roster all year? It's insane.
You're paying... How much are you paying to the combination of Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, and Alec Ingold? $10 million?
Right about, probably, yeah.
You could have signed an offensive lineman for that. So none of that makes sense. And then to further add more frustration, you saw that... when the Dolphins were down by 2 scores, looked like they may have had a chance to climb back in the game. They're at the 5-yard line. What's their personnel package? Alec Ingold, Durham Smythe, who were on the ground after the snap. I don't get the personnel groupings at all.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I think Tyreek Hill even kind of, he's taking the high road, it seems, for Tyreek Hill anyway, but he seemed like he was frustrated about coming off the field and made it sound like him and the coaches need to, learn from those mistakes. So I have no idea what that personnel was there. And I agree with you. I mean, if you have Jeff Wilson on the roster, you let Chris Brooks go. Everybody's upset about that. You have Jeff Wilson on the roster. This is when he should be that fresh, guy. You're getting him out there in Lambeau Field, that cold weather. Let him run the rock, and you're not giving him carries. Jalen Wright, even. I mean, let's see what he can do. I don't get it, and to see it just turn into a pumpkin over these last few weeks. I mean, are we starting to finally realize that our guards aren't good enough? I know we all like to, throw out these different analytics and things like that, but Liam Eichenberg, Robert Jones. I mean, we all could admit that they're, below average. Maybe okay, they're average. They're average guards, but we're starting to see that come to fruition and start to be a lot more of a liability. Playing some of these better teams with a Rashawn Gary and some of those other guys up front.
And I don't think it's one of those guys specifically. It's the fact you have those guys, and I'm not trying to throw shots. I think he's played well, but Kendall Lamb, the Dolphins don't have those playmakers on the offensive line or just somewhere to make a play. It's so crazy to me that Alec Ingold's been on this team for 3 years, and Miami just still fails to be that short yardage football team. You have a fullback who is year after year acknowledged with Pro Bowl honors and all these different things, and I'm not throwing shade at him either. It's just very strange how Miami's just where I think in year 3 of the McDaniel system, and I don't want to give him a pass, you'd think they'd be able to win in the margins with these different packages they have. Hey, Odell Beckham, we're going to figure out how to use him, right? It's just kind of depressing to see how, like you said, play starts, you have Durham Smythe and Alec Ingold just on the ground. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And it seemed like they started to have something going running to the left with Teron Armstead, Alec Ingold, and Julian Hill, for as much as Julian Hill is messed up. It seemed like between those 3 guys they had something going over there, and then it just hasn't happened as much again. Now, a lot of that has to do with in the last game with being down early, but hopefully that continues. But last 4 games, Raheem Mostert, 10 carries, 22 yards. You're going to do that, cut the guy, and let him go somewhere else where he can compete. I expect Mostert, you talk about the Dolphins have hinted at different personnel packages. I'm predicting Mostert leads the team in carries this week.
And I just don't know why you wait, like you mentioned. Like, he was in the doghouse. Why do you wait until, you're not mathematically eliminated, but you kind of are? One thing I want to see, and I see people talking about on Twitter, maybe it's just, a fan aspect, but why not throw a 6th offensive lineman out there? Why not get Patrick Paul in the game there at the goal line? I mean, I don't understand what you have against that, what you have against, like you mentioned, giving Alec Ingold the rock there. I mean, it just seems like something that you should at least try when you've been stuffed or failed to, succeed down there at the goal line. So lots of question marks. I think they'll get it all right, though, this week against the Jets. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, I interrupted you, but I've been 100% with you. I'm stunned that more teams don't do this in the NFL. They're starting to now. The Bills did it quite frequently in the snow. When it's 90-something degrees in Miami, which isn't going to be the case this weekend, but early in the year, why you don't stick a 6th offensive lineman out there and say, we're just going to run the ball down your throat in the 4th quarter? I don't get it. Why not? And this happened 10 years ago or 11 years ago when with the whole Jonathan Martin, Richie Incognito, where both guys left the team and they had like nothing on the offensive line. So they said, we're just going to play with 6 linemen. And it worked. It worked perfectly. And they won that game against the Bengals on that walk-off Cameron Wake safety play. And it worked. And then they got Bryant McKinney, and then they just stopped doing it. And they couldn't block anyone the rest of the year. To see it work, for me to fantasize about that for so long, and then see it work for one game, and then they're like, oh, let's just not do that again. That just seems to be like the Dolphins' mantra, regardless of who's coach.
And, McDaniel, all about the player workloads, building people up. I mean, wouldn't Isaiah Wynn be like the ideal 6 like swing offensive lineman? I think he's like the perfect body type for that, where he'd be that type of guy you want out there. A lot of questions, but I think this is a Jets defense the Dolphins are going to be able to run upon quite a bit. And Cat, if the running game does open things up, you have a wide receiver who loves to absolutely feast against the Jets. Jaylen Waddle on December 17th, 8 receptions for 142 yards and 1 touchdown. November 24th at MetLife, 8 receptions for 114 yards, 8 for 8 on all targets. With Sauce Gardner unlikely to go, man, I think this is going to be a game. If the Dolphins want to prove we're still going to be in this playoff hunt, it's a big Jaylen Waddle day.
Yeah, I think this is a game where the Dolphins break a few big plays out. They've seen a lot of too high safety looks. That's was to be expected after how they played the last 2 years. Sauce Gardner's out. Quantez Stiggers is going to be starting on the boundary, and he was the cornerback drafted, first guy I believe ever drafted in the NFL draft from the CFL from the Toronto Argonauts. So that'll be a fascinating matchup. And Jaylen Waddle's always seemed to get the better of DJ Reed. So I like the matchup there. I think this team is hungering for some big plays, and I think they get them. Now, the running game, on the other hand, you look at the Jets against the run the last 3 weeks. James Conner, 12 carries, 33 yards. Jonathan Taylor, 24 carries, 57 yards. Kenneth Walker, 16 carries, 49 yards. Jets have been really good against the run the last couple of weeks, but then again, no Sauce Gardner on the outside. C.J. Mosley went on injured reserve. Quinnen Williams needs to have a game-wrecking type of game here, and he might against this Dolphins offensive line. But that's a huge matchup. If you control Quinnen Williams, I think you cut off the head of the snake there.
And that should be, I mean, then you should have victory, right? We're starting to see Jaylen Waddle kind of, pick it up as of late, at least in Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, since he's come back from that, I mean, I know we haven't won as many games as we'd hope, but dude is playing out of his mind. I don't think he's ever lost to the Jets. So this offense should have no problem just going out there and just picking them apart without, again, Sauce Gardner, who, is arguably one of the best corners, if not the best in football.
Year 3 of the Mike McDaniel system, and it's still, hey, if we can win in the trenches. The Miami Dolphins offensive line allowed 5 sacks last week. The Jets sacked Geno Smith 3 times. Will McDonald leads the team with 10 sacks. Kat, does Tua continue his reign of terror over the New York Jets? What's your prediction for this game?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a game the Dolphins are going to win. I mean, you just historically, just over the last 3 years, it feels like a bounce-back game for the Dolphins. Doesn't erase any narratives, but you've got to put wins on the board. I think they win. I think they win convincingly. I'm going to go 34-14 Dolphins.
27-17. I can't do what I can't go with Kat's answer.
Win, Josh.
No, absolutely not. I don't think the Jets can win. But again, it's the Dolphins. That'd be so Dolphins' way for Tua to get his first loss against this Jets team. But I just can't see it. Dolphins need it too much. We're all going to get very high off this victory. We're going to feel the hopium. We know we're going to feel like we're right back in it. But like you mentioned, it's the Jets, Cat. We should be able to go out there and just beat up on them. But we'd be 6-7 at that point and still in the hunt, which is all we care about at this point.
Hanging onto that graphic. That's all we need. As long as we're on the in the hunt graphic, we'll feel right at home. Yeah, 34-10. I think the Dolphins walk away with this one. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for a lot of players on both sides of the ball to prove, hey, we're not out of this just yet. And hopefully it is a big Waddle day. Hopefully a big Jonnu game for my fantasy team. Thank you all so much for listening to another Dolphins podcast. Kat, it was so great to have you back. We will be back on Monday to recap this game between the Jets and Dolphins. If you're liking the show, please take a minute, hit that subscribe button. And if you have an extra moment, if you can leave a comment review, that helps others find the show. We always appreciate that stuff. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. And most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.